John Walker sat pensively for a moment in front of a moss-covered grave. His eyes wandered absent-mindedly over the clouds and sky, taking in the lonely, desolate scene around him. Human lives had truly gone through so much fate, as well as so many rhythms that make one contemplative. Regarding the life story of the girl buried under this tombstone, part of it may have been due to the gullibility and foolishness of that young man, as well as the blind passion in the girl's love affair. Ending the story about the moss-covered grave, Mr. Walker stood up and continued on to another tombstone. This new grave was completely separate from the others. It was solemnly situated alone in the cemetery. The nearest tombstone was probably at least 10 meters away. This grave was overgrown with weeds, looking exactly like an abandoned, untended tombstone from long ago. Mr. Walker stepped up close to the grave, lifting his bony hands to pull out some of the towering weeds, revealing the tombstone beneath. After pulling out the weeds, he sat down on the ground, pointing at the grave, and said, "The person buried in this grave also died a very unfortunate death, a death that had to be exchanged with his own life. If the owner of this grave had not died, perhaps many people would have lost their lives because of what was buried with him." Liu looked at the old man and asked, "What kind of person was the owner of this grave, sir?" Mr. Walker looked up at the sky for a while, pondering for a long time before replying, "I don't remember very clearly anymore. This person died a long time ago. I don't know what his occupation was when he was alive, but regarding his personality, I think he was a very good person, a true hero." Liu listened very seriously as Mr. Walker spoke. He sat there waiting to hear the life story of this man revealed by Mr. Walker. Mr. Walker said, "Before he died, he left me a suicide note. It said to bury him with that thing, so that the nightmare would finally end." Liu asked, "Did he meet you before he died?" Mr. Walker nodded and said, "Not only did he meet me, he died right in front of me." Liu's eyes widened in slight surprise. That is to say, the person under this grave had committed suicide right in front of Mr. Walker. What could have happened to drive a person to such desperation? Liu stared intently at Mr. Walker, waiting for a satisfactory answer. Mr. Walker paused for a moment, then began to recollect the old story. The story recorded in the suicide note of the man lying beneath this grave. The story about a painting. John Smith was a famous artist who received a lot of praise in the industry. His paintings were usually abstract sculptures, sometimes very difficult to understand in many ways. But if one could contemplate the beauty in them, and know how to look at them in a very unique way, those paintings were unique and unmatched. However, fate did not smile upon him, for his life was also very short. When he had just completed a work that was considered the greatest of his life, he also died. He died a bizarre death with a startled, shocked expression. People saw him collapse in front of his painting. His fingers splayed in a gesture of trying to gouge out his own eyes. The renowned artist John Smith had died, and this news immediately shook the art world as soon as it appeared. John Smith's final painting was considered the most valuable artwork of all time, and his family auctioned it off immediately afterwards. A record-high price was paid for a painting by a Vietnamese artist, over $10 million for a single artwork by John Smith, purchased by a wealthy Vietnamese American who had just returned from the U.S. to permanently settle in Vietnam. Although the painting had been auctioned off and purchased successfully, there were still many who wanted to hunt for the painting as a kind of investigative hobby. Many people wanted to see John Smith's final painting, to see what secrets were hidden in the masterpiece that could have shocked the artist to death. However, since the buyer at that record-breaking auction, the painting had not been seen again. The man could not be identified, nor could the painting's whereabouts be determined. Things continued as such, seeming to fade into obscurity. Many people thought that John Smith's final painting would never be viewed again. But no, 2 years later the painting reappeared. This time people heard news identical to before. The owner of the painting had died a bizarre, sudden death from fright and heart failure, just like the late artist John Smith. When his body was discovered, it seemed he had also been trying to claw out his own ease, as if not wanting to see something. The painting once again appeared before the public, and this time was auctioned off again. With 2 bizarre incidents happening to its previous owners, the painting's value rose higher than ever. A price of $25 million was offered. No other painting by a Vietnamese artist had ever reached such a record value. Continuing the events that transpired previously, the next owner of the painting also met the same fate as the two before him. He too lived in seclusion with the painting for 2 years, before dying in similar fashion. This raised growing suspicions and curiosity. What secrets did this painting contain? Amidst the public uproar over such matters, the authorities stepped in. A case involving just one painting that had sequentially led to the deaths of 3 people posed a huge question. The authorities suspected foul play, that someone had murdered all 3 victims using the same method. They did not believe the claim that people simply looked at a painting and then dropped dead. That was an extremely foolish explanation that only immature thinkers, art fanatics, or superstitious madmen could consider to be deaths from fright. A special investigative task force was formed, led by Detective Hank Rogers. Rogers was tasked to uncover leads and collate information related to all 3 victims, looking for suspicious persons who could be the serial killer. Could it be a crazed art lover who did not want anyone else to own the painting? But Rogers quickly dismissed this idea. If the killer loved the painting so much, he should have killed the owners and taken the painting for himself. So why did he leave the painting behind? Thinking about this issue, Detective Rogers came up with a strict line of reasoning. It was very likely that the killer wanted to fabricate natural-looking deaths, so the authorities could not find any clues, only considering them sudden death cases. Then the killer would try to reclaim the painting through more legitimate means. This was the viewpoint that Rogers stubbornly clung to, in order to deduce the next path to finding the culprit. While the new investigative task force had just been formed, the painting was once again announced to be auctioned off. But this time, completely different from all previous instances. Before anyone could pay to acquire the painting, it completely disappeared. Forever. An extremely bizarre disappearance. No one was the owner, nor could anyone possess it, so where had the painting gone? Was it stolen? If so, who was the thief that could slip past hundreds of security staff at the auction, causing the painting to vanish right before the final gavel pound signaling the winning bid? This latest incident further mystified the painting, leading to more fanciful stories woven about it. Could it be that the painting had come alive and disappeared itself so as not to kill any more people? Instead, the final bidder was left sitting there, stunned and surprised, as he had assumed the painting would fall into his hands, allowing him once again to admire the artistic beauty of it. After the disappearance of the painting, the case became a huge unsolved mystery. Rogers had no choice but to temporarily shelve the investigation, along with the case of the 3 deaths, as he could not find any related clues. All 3 victims had lived alone, with no grudges or disputes with anyone. The time period from when they acquired the painting to when they died was very limited in social interactions with others, so the case hit a dead end and had to be closed. 2 years later, Rogers walked slowly down a deserted street. In the cold, foggy night, he suddenly noticed a woman's silhouette gliding as if flying through the darkness. Her slender, delicate figure was strangely beautiful. The woman kept peering around furtively, looking left and right as if afraid of someone discovering her. This made Rogers highly attentive, feeling that she was engaged in some evil, criminal act and did not want to be caught by others. His instincts told him it was very likely she would commit an illegal action. Rogers tailed her closely from that point onward, and from when he started following her, she seemed completely unaware that someone had been walking so closely behind her this whole time. She just kept looking around without any sense of being tracked and pursued. Rogers followed her until she stopped in front of a house and sneakily went inside. The house door was not closed, so being extra cautious, Rogers looked around before slipping in after her. Once inside, he continued down the hallway the girl had just entered. Her silhouette was still obscurely visible ahead, and he couldn't let her out of his sight. But after walking another 5 meters, her shadow suddenly disappeared, startling Rogers slightly. He tried to calm down. The end of this hallway was a dead end. So where had the girl gone? Before he could answer that question, something appeared before Rogers' eyes that made him gasp in fragments. The painting. Yes, it was exactly the painting that had stirred up public opinion for many years. It was the extremely mysterious painting that had disappeared, John Smith's final work. Rogers felt very surprised. Why was it here? Why was it in this house belonging to that woman? Where had that woman disappeared to? Not waiting to answer his own questions, drawing on his investigative experience, as soon as he discovered a clue, to play it safe and avoid stirring up a hornet's nest, Rogers backed away down the hallway and exited the house. After getting outside, Rogers was sure to mentally note every detail of the house's appearance, including address, architecture, and surrounding landscape, missing nothing. When he returned to the police station, Rogers decided not to mention this matter to anyone and investigate on his own first. He planned how to approach that girl and try to find out why she had the painting, and whether she was the serial killer who had murdered the 3 previous owners to steal the painting. After forming his plan the very next day, Rogers relied on his memory to return to the old location. It was still that same house, still a luxurious old French-style mansion. It was located in a deserted neighborhood right next to a cemetery, with no other houses around it. The house looked like it hadn't been cared for in a long time, with fallen leaves littering the lawn all around. The lime plaster walls were also flaking off in chunks from the erosion of time. The house's appearance in daylight was extremely different compared to nighttime. It was like a light being switched on or off. Last night when he saw the house, it only had a strangely gloomy, eerie air, but this morning it looked utterly beautiful and radiant. Rogers approached the house and started raising his hand to gently knock on the wooden door 3 times. Next, he silently stood there waiting. But there was no response, nor any sounds emanating from behind the wooden door. All was silent. After waiting a while longer without any activity, Rogers prepared to knock again. But this time the door opened swiftly, yet Rogers didn't see anyone. Just a voice calling out, "What business? Looking for someone?" Rogers was rather stunned, not knowing who he was conversing with. But last night, before coming here, he had conceived all sorts of persuasive reasons and evidence to be able to approach this woman. He tidied his clothes a bit, cleared his throat, and said, "Hello, miss. I'm someone who loves old houses. The architecture of this house is so beautiful. I'd like to purchase it. I wonder if you—" But before Rogers could finish speaking, a voice from inside immediately responded very quickly and decisively, "Not for sale." Rogers was slightly taken aback. At this point, he hadn't expected that after just one sentence, she would dismiss him so rudely. But he remained fully confident he could break through her defensive walls. Without mentioning Rogers' purpose for approaching her, just looking at his appearance and talents alone, back in the police academy, there had been many beautiful female cadets head over heels for him. There had even been a few times when girls confessed their love to him right in the academy yard. Rogers had experienced things like that very often. After starting to work at the department, there were also quite a few other beautiful girls chasing after Rogers, but he had never reciprocated any of them. Rogers considered himself a man of distinction, so of course when selecting someone he could develop feelings for, she would naturally have to be outstanding. Although Detective Rogers had not yet seen the girl's face, only hearing her voice, he guessed that her figure was not too bad. Even if she was a bit ugly, that would make it even easier to approach her. Before coming here, Rogers had calculated 2 plans. 1. If she agreed to sell the house, he would use that as a legitimate reason to inquire about all her movements, including the painting's history. 2. If she refused, he would immediately switch to Plan B of asking to tour the house and flirt with her. Both of these ways could be used to investigate the woman. This was called taking advantage of a man's tactics. After thinking through everything in his mind, Rogers continued speaking earnestly. "All right, if you don't have that intention, may I ask to tour this house a bit? I really love the architecture of old houses and want to recreate many of those architectural styles elsewhere." After Rogers spoke, he stood motionless in place, waiting. It was a long time later before there was a response. "Okay, you may enter." The girl agreed to let Rogers enter, with a tone that was not joyful at all. Rogers was brimming with enthusiasm, nodding his head slowly as he took polite steps inside with the gait of a gentleman. Upon arriving, he saw the indoor lights had already been switched on. A very beautiful girl with high-nosed bridge, large sparkling eyes, and very attractive lips, was holding a glass of red wine, looking at him full of provocation. Rogers tilted his head slightly, as if to greet her. Then he approached, Not waiting for her invitation and casually sitting down to chat, he said, "I didn't expect the owner of this house to be such a beautiful and youthful woman." The girl also tilted her head in response. She said, "Age does not determine success." Then she jerked her chin, pointing to the painting hanging on the wall at the end of the hallway. The painting was visible through the window. She continued, "Do you know who painted that? He was also very young." Rogers pretended to be slightly surprised, slowly turning to look at the painting as if seeing it for the first time. He murmured softly, "Oh, never in my life have I been able to see such a beautiful painting." The girl's expression darkened a little, seeming tense as she asked Rogers, "Do you understand everything the painting conveys? Can you see all the issues in it?" Rogers kept staring at the painting, not realizing that at some point, the girl's eyes had revealed a murderous aura, as if she would swallow Rogers alive if he could not answer to her satisfaction. Rogers tilted his head, then turned back to look at the girl. At this time, her face had changed to a charming smile, hiding the murderous expression from earlier. It was now an extremely attractive face looking at Rogers. Rogers happily replied, "This painting is very beautiful, but I guess it contains too many profound secrets. I can't fully grasp the issues in it. The person who painted this is truly a genius." The girl's mouth curled up in a slight smile, her index finger softly tracing her own tempting red lips. She said, "Yes, to understand that painting, no matter how knowledgeable about art, it would take at least 2 years to grasp what issues it contains." Rogers looked extremely interested. He said, "Oh, then what about someone unversed in art?" The girl still smiled, a smile silently oozing murderous intent. Her eyes were gradually showing determination. She replied, "Also just 2 years, with my assistance." When the girl spoke to this point, Rogers immediately felt satisfied. The crux of the whole affair seemed to be gradually revealing itself from behind the veil. This girl certainly had some relation to the secrets of that painting over there, and most of all, it was very likely that she was the serial killer. Rogers looked at the girl for a moment, then said politely, "You are so beautiful. I want to admire you more. May I also have permission to come here many more times to view that painting? I hope you'll allow it." The girl thought for a while, her eyebrows furrowing slightly, not because a sudden request from a strange man made her worried, but because she was concerned whether her actions toward him were too hasty. Rogers waited and waited, but still saw her lost in thought, so he tactfully reminded her a few times to get his point across. After hinting the third time, she finally seemed to awaken from her reverie. Smiling, she agreed. "All right, I consent, but for convenience, please still come at night, because during the day I'm not home frequently." After speaking, the girl winked flirtatiously at Rogers, that he should just charge into the battlefield now. Rogers nodded, politely bidding the girl goodbye. "Then, if possible, I'll return tomorrow night. Please help me interpret the painting, and if possible, allow me to treat you to dinners as repayment for your kindness." The girl slowly pondered for a bit, then shook her head answering, "No need. You coming here to see the painting makes me happy already. It's rare for someone to share my interest. I don't like going out. Just come here, and we'll have dinner together. I'll prepare everything to entertain you." Rogers happily said, "All right then, goodbye, miss." After speaking, he turned and left the house. Just as he had barely gotten outside, the wooden door slammed shut. Through this first conversation with her, Rogers felt as if he had just experienced some kind of sweet, honey-like flavor that he had never tasted before. Returning to the police station, Rogers again continued gathering all materials related to art appreciation. During the conversation with the girl, he had shown great interest in the painting, so in their next meeting, he still needed some preparation to make himself seem knowledgeable. That way, the conversation would proceed smoothly and naturally, without making her suspicious of his investigation of her. The next evening, Rogers reappeared at that house, not forgetting to bring a bouquet of roses arranged extremely beautifully. When going to dine at someone's house, it was best to also bring a small gift for the host. Rogers thought this was very suitable for the girl living in this old European-style house. She would probably like what he did. He raised his hand before the wooden door, and this time knocked 3 more consistent knocks. Identical to last time, it was still a very long wait before he saw the door open. This time Rogers saw the girl had appeared right in front of him, clearly unlike last time when he met her like a disembodied spirit, almost scaring him out of his wits. She looked at Rogers, then broke into a charming smile, saying, "Please come in." Rogers bowed his head slightly, then politely held the bouquet in an upright arm posture, elbows slightly raised. He brought the flowers close to her face so the fragrant aroma could waft forth. He spoke in an extremely sweet tone. "For you, my esteemed future art mentor." The girl seemed very happy. She accepted the bouquet and quickly put it away in a vase, carefully admiring it. The two began dinner in an extremely romantic atmosphere, accompanied by heated topics revolving around art. From then on, Rogers was able to get closer to the girl, conversing with her daily. He increasingly understood more and more about the painting hanging on the wall. The veils were gradually lifted afterward, but that was not what frightened Rogers the most. What frightened him most was his own calmness. Toward the girl was slowly disappearing over time. The distinguished Rogers had to surrender before the sweet temptation of this woman, before her honeyed allure. He had fallen in love with her.